Okay, hi, Assalamualaikum, and a very good afternoon. Thank you, participants, for joining us at this session. I'm Dr. Anya. I am a UPM lecturer, and I'm also the coordinator for this program. We are very delighted to have everyone around. Just a few housekeeping rules. So what we will do is the first speaker will speak, which is Prof. Dr. Tengku, who will be speaking. And then after her session, if you have any questions, ask her immediately because she will leave by 4. So then the questions that you have for Prof. May, which is the second speaker, you can ask her after that. So if you all have any questions for Dr. Ain, you better ask her immediately before she leaves. Okay?
Actually, I'll be around to the end.
Oh, you'll be around. Okay, that's great then. That's a bonus for us. Thank you very much. I would also like to give acknowledgement for the organizing committee. The chairperson is Professor Mae-Lynn. I'm the coordinator. And then the moderator for the webinar today is the head of department at UKM, which is Prof. Dr. Norshamsiah, and the committee members who are Ivan, Murshida, Prema, Kajun, Alex, and Encik Hairul, and also the AV person, Encik Bukhari. Thank you very much for making this happen. So, like I said, we also have a Google feedback form, which is very important so that we can improve on the next webinar series. Please fill in the Google feedback form that will be shared at the end of this session, and fill in the form by the 28th, this Sunday. All right. So I will hand over the microphone to the moderator, Prof. Dr. Norshamsiah. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi, and a very good afternoon or evening to everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you in our first ever UKM Ophthalmology webinar series. It's actually an effort to share our experience and our knowledge to all of you because of what happened to the world from the pandemic, and we hope that this platform would be an easier and a more simple way to convey knowledge. Okay, we are very fortunate today to have Associate Professor Dr. Tengku all the way from University Malaya. Thank you so much for joining us. And our very own Professor Mae-Lynn, who has made a huge effort to make this possible. Without any ado, I would like to now introduce Associate Professor Dr. Tengku, who is a former. I'll just share my screen now. Okay. No, sorry. Not this one. Okay, I couldn't sort it out. But anyway, Associate Professor Dr. Can you see my screen? I wonder.
Yes, I think so. I think this is your screen.
Also, I'm presenting your research. It's on the screen now.
This one. Can you see?
Yep.
Okay. So, Associate Professor Tengku is a senior consultant ophthalmologist in University Malaya. She specializes in vitro retina, and she was the former head of the Eye Research Center. She graduated from University Malaya and went on to do her master's in ophthalmology from University Malaya as well as National University of Singapore. Following which she completed her doctorate in philosophy or PhD from University of Oxford. So she has a lot of papers under her belt. She currently has, I think, about 25, 26, nearly 30 publications under her name. And she also has completed a clinical fellowship program from the National University of Singapore in medical and surgical retina. So you are all very fortunate to have Associate Professor Dr. Tengku to be speaking on how to make a perfect abstract. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Ain.
Okay, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'll share my screen now. Right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tengku from University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, and I'm very honored. The honor is mine to be invited to be the first speaker of the first UKM Ophthalmology webinar series for 2020. Congratulations to UKM. And I wish to firstly acknowledge and thank you the organizers, AP Norshamsiah Mae-Lynn, for the very, very kind introduction, and Prof Mae-Lynn for inviting me for this talk. So I have no financial declarations to make. And the topic given to me today is the tips of writing a good abstract. So I'll try to cover as much as possible. Here are the main contents for the talks. What is an abstract? Why is an abstract important? How to write an abstract? Types of abstracts, examples, making abstracts searchable, which is quite interesting in this day and age, summary of the entire talk. And finally, the tips. So as per the title of the tips for writing a good abstract, unfortunately, you have to listen to my entire talk before we reach the tips. Right, so before you write an abstract, the first thing that you need to know is the anatomy of a scientific paper. So you see in this slide is a Meo's fishbone model of a scientific manuscript. There are 8 components to a scientific manuscript: the title, abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusions, acknowledgement. Today, we are focusing just on number 2, the abstract, which is the second item in the fishbone. So now that you know what a scientific article consists of, we will skim through it. So what do you do when you get a scientific article to read? So generally, we skim through the entire picture to get the entire article, to get the bigger picture. Today, we're just going to be focusing on the first part, just to get the bigger picture by reading the title, the keywords, the abstract. And because this will tell you the major findings and why they matter in the shortest possible time. So this will be the focus of our talk. So what is an abstract? Here is a slide showing 3 photographs of shop windows, number 1, number 2, and number 3. So if you were walking past these shops, which of these 3 shops would you enter? Since this is not interactive, I'll answer myself. I would definitely enter number 2 and number 3, just by what I see by walking on the pavement. So this is a prime example of how first impression matters. So in shop number 2, sorry, I'll just go back. In shop number 2, you see a lot of colorful, interesting vases, ornaments, and I'm interested to see more. So I would enter the shop to see what else they have to offer. Shop number 3, I can see what is being sold just by looking at it from across the street. There's pastries on display, the open concept with glass walls, giving me information about what kind of pastries are being sold, who is selling, who are buying, what drinks are available. You can see a Coca-Cola advertisement there. And whether in this day and age, most importantly, whether I can practice social distancing if I were to buy a cup of coffee, which I possibly can. So back to our talk. So what is an abstract? An abstract is like a shop window to your article, to your research, to your scientific work. It's also like a sales pitch to the product that you're trying to sell. So it gives a glimpse of your overall work, like this lady looking through a shop window of an art gallery, looking what is on display. It highlights the importance of your results. It tempts the researcher into entering the shop, or in this case, into reading your article, your full article, and provides information. This is quite interesting. It provides information that gives a search engine like Google all the data it needs to be able to find your article, for anybody to find your article and rank it according to the search results page. I'll go through it deeper at the end of the talk. So why is it important? Because it is the first thing that any reader reads. It's the first element. Apart from your title, abstract is the next. And it is the mostly read element. It's also mostly freely available to readers without having to subscribe to any database or any libraries or any journals. And it is a deciding key factor for the readers, editors, and reviewers to take it forward. It is also the mark of the value of your entire work and paper. So what does it mean to the reader? In this slide, the reader will want to know, what is this research about? Is it interesting? Is it relevant to my work? Should I download it and read the full paper? But the most important question she is actually asking is, should I cite this paper in my references? Now, what does it mean to the editor? Is this study important, interesting? What are the highlights? Is this relevant to my journal? Is it worthy of my reviewer's time and effort? But what he is actually asking is, should I accept, should I review, or should I reject? So this is where you get your answers quite quickly if you understand for submissions. Do they ponder about it, or they glance through it and skim through it and reject it outright, or they accept it? So this is your sales pitch. That's why it's very, very important. What does it mean to the reviewer? So the key question here is, he asks himself to review or not to review, but actually what he's asking is this paper worth publishing? So it means a lot of things, a lot of important things, key deciding factor to all these key deciding people, which is all going dependent on how you write it. So that's why abstract is key to your paper, at least to the success of your paper. So now we begin. How do I begin writing an abstract? The answer to that is, firstly, you must know the process of writing and publishing a scientific paper, because that is the most important reason for writing an abstract. But publishing scientific papers are not the reason of writing an abstract. Sometimes you write theses, you write grant proposals, and you write abstracts for those. But the structure, the style, and the focus, and the reason why you write them are pretty much the same. So you can apply this to most of the circumstances listed above. So the process of writing an article is not the same as reading it. So what do I mean? Here is the fishbone model again. When we read, we begin from the left to the right. We begin from the title and then we end with the conclusions. But when we write an article, the entire scientific article, we do it in a very peculiar but very different way. We begin typically with the results that we have. We analyze the results. We make sense of it. We display it in figures, in tables, in graphs, in charts. This is our data. This is our key product that we're trying to sell. Then we arrange them to complete the story of our research from the beginning till the end. Now that you have the sequence of your results, you move on. And the next easier thing to write is methods. Methods is usually the easiest of all these other sections. With methods come along results. Since now you have your results in graphic form, all you need to do is just interpret them in word form. And then based on your results, then you can more or less write and make sense of your findings in your discussion. Then this is followed by conclusion, which is shorter than the discussion. Only then you go back and write your introduction. So you don't write introduction first for your scientific article, you write it last. And last and not least, you decide on your title. You can still tweak around until the final aspect, because it depends on the story that you're trying to sell, and you will only know the full story once you reach the end of the conclusion and you know the results. Then you write the abstract and your keywords. So if there is only one thing that you can remember from this entire talk, let it be what is written on this slide. The abstract is written last, not first. So like a sales pitch, an abstract should be short, clear, concise, straight to the point, factual, easy to read, and easily understood. So this is basically an outline of the process of writing an abstract. You select the journal, whether you think that that journal might be interested in the research that you, or your findings that you had in your research, and the audience would be interested to know. Whether it's ISI, for us it's ISI or Scopus or those kind of things. Who do you think would be interested to read your paper? Then you read the author guidelines, instruction to authors. And when in particular reference to abstract, you look at the abstract structure. Sometimes they write a certain peculiar way, like JAMA Ophthalmology has a peculiar way of writing abstract. Well, not peculiar, but a specific way of structuring your abstract. Generally, it follows the IMRAD model, the introduction, methods, research, and discussion. The abstract length is typically 200 to 250 words. It's journal dependent. Some goes up to 350. So of these 200 to 350 words, every single word must count, must make, must be impactful, must be carefully selected. Your sentences must be well designed. So then you go into purpose. You must clearly state your aim and your key arguments as to why you carry out this research and why you think that your results is important and it adds to the value of the available scientific knowledge. Then you go into your methods. Your methods needs not to be the detailed methods that you can detail out later on in your full article. It has to be an overview of what you did. It must be clear and it must be concise. It must have the key information about what is important and how you carry it out. The outcome, you must be direct, you must use very clear words, straight to the point, factual, do not exaggerate your findings, and active voice. I'll explain about this further later. The value, when you do a discussion, when you do a conclusion, your abstract, you need to have a fair analysis of your results. You must acknowledge that you may have limitations, and if you find that your findings is interesting and it leads to further questions, then you might state a few words about where the direction of future research might go, how your results leads to new questions. So what are the components of an abstract? Objectives, they basically tell what is your research about. The purpose, why do you think it's important? Why do you actually carry out the entire project? How was it done? That's your approach, that's your methodology. And what will you present? What did you find? Why is it important? What is the significance? So basically these are the backbone of an abstract. So choice of words is very important. You must use clear and committal words. It has to be carefully selected. You might need thesaurus online to express what you mean. If so, just do so, because a lot of people do so. Avoid at all costs vague words. So some of the examples of clear and committal words are things like show, demonstrate, prove, suggest, highlight. The more abstracts you read, you'll find that these things are repeated over and over again by different authors in different papers. But they tend to not to repeat the same words in the same abstract. They vary it. So it depends on, you can just look it up. It's just synonyms and thesaurus online. Avoid vague words like possibly, maybe, potentially. So this tells that you're not sure about what you found. Why should I be interested if you are not sure? So avoid this in your abstract, because you're trying to sell something. If you're not sure of your product, nobody will be wanting to hear anything else that you have to say. So again, it's like a sales pitch. So what's an active voice and what is a passive voice? So the examples here are it's like an active voice in a sentence. I drive the car. These are 4 words. I can also restructure the sentence by saying, the car is driven by me. It carries the same meaning, but now it has 6 words. Smoking causes lung cancer. 4 words, maximal impact. I can also rephrase it by saying lung cancer is caused by lung cancer is caused by smoking. Beg your pardon. So it's 6 words. It's unnecessary 2 additional words. Cataract impairs vision. Full stop. 3 words. Vision is impaired by cataracts, 5 words. So here I'm trying to demonstrate how you can basically shorten your sentences by carrying the same meaning and omit unnecessary words, because you're bound by the number of words. And so every sentence that you cut words matters. An example, so this is a complex paper that we published in 2017. Don't worry if you don't understand it, but I'll break it down one by one because it's quite complex. So it takes me some time to actually break it down too. So this is a series of experiments. We had 5 or 6 large experiments, large scientific experiments, and we had to basically cramp everything in just a few sentences. So this was our abstract. So this paper required us to present it in this format: aims, results, innovation, and conclusion. So the first line introduces what a microRNA is. The second line justifies the study. It says it's currently little is known. It demonstrates a gap in current knowledge, so it makes a case for us carrying this project. By the third line, the purpose of this study was to investigate the role of so and so and so forth and so forth. By the third line, you can guess where this paper is going. Then in the results, we have 6 separate experiments, and each are very detailed, very lengthy to explain. But in the abstract, we summarize the methods and the results and our working hypothesis in 5 complete, meaningful, carefully designed sentences, and they're all packed with information required to attract the reader's attention. So each sentence basically summarizes each experiment and the results and what it means. So every word is very carefully selected. This paper requires us to clearly state what is special about our findings, under innovation. So in this case, we had to we wrote it was actually remote cell-to-cell communication. So and how microRNA leads to diabetic complications in the eye. So that's just in one sentence. So that basically is how it's just an example about how you use words like show. I've underlined show, culturing, identify, postulate, results, suggest. So these words that we use is to emphasize our findings, and it's also as a reflection of our confidence and commitment in our results and working hypothesis. Something more interesting. So some journals require that the authors not only give abstracts, but provide highlights. So what are highlights? Highlights are basically shorter summaries in bullet points. It has key findings, short sentences, and easily understood. So this is a very interesting paper, and it is one of the most highly cited for this journal. So it actually is titled Enriched Environment Exposure Accelerates Rodent Driving Skills. This is not a spam. This is an actual scientific paper. So yes, you read it correctly, it's a rodent driving skills. So what does it highlight? So the highlights basically is just short, simple to understand, no jargon. And it says rats, i.e. rodents, rats can learn complex tasks of navigating a car. Yes, they actually demonstrated that rats can drive a car to a desired goal area. And they find that enriched environments, whatever this is, increases their competency of driving. And the driving rats maintain an interest in the car through extinction. It's quite morbid here because I think you know what it means, the extinction. So they probably have shortened their lives for an experiment. Maybe, I didn't read the paper. And the task incorporates complex skills, mastery, which are important for future work, for translational research. So this is the abstract. So from the highlights, I was interested to know more, and that's why I picked this paper out, even if I was not a scientist working in the same field. So the first sentence, let's break it down. The first sentence, although rarely used, long-term behavioral training protocols provide information, so on and so forth. So the first sentence provides the introduction and the justification for the study. The second sentence, the author is already describing the methods. These rats were taught how to drive. And there is such a thing called a rodent-operated vehicle in a forward direction. The third sentence is the results comparative to the control groups. By the fourth sentence, the authors have already got a mixture of results and discussion. It suggests that by giving some corticosterone mixture, they seem to have enhanced markers of emotional resilience. By the fifth sentence, the authors have concluded their research. And by the sixth sentence, which is the last sentence, the authors discusses the suggestions for future research based on their results. So this is the last example of how a good extract is. This, as you know, is one of the first few publications on Protocol T by the DRCR team. So it was published in New England. I think the abstract words was between 200 to 350, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a lot of words here, but let's break it down again. So the first sentence, the word relative already means there's a comparison being done. Efficacy and safety of intravitreal aflibercept, bevacizumab, Bastion, in the treatment of diabetic macular edema are unknown. So in just a single sentence, it contains the introduction, the methods, the importance, the gaps in existing knowledge, and the justification of the study. Just in a single sentence. In the method sentence, it informs the reader of only the key information that the readers should know: multiple sites, number of participants, dosage, and at the same time when you give dosage, you tell them what are the types of medications and the outcome. And the authors cleverly summarize their detailed protocol with the words according to a protocol specified algorithm. So if you need to know how often do they come for OCTs, how often do they get follow-up, how far a gap between the appointments, you have to look it up, download the paper, and then look at the algorithm. So that's how they entice readers. Next, the results. It's the longest, but everything that is written there only contain only the essential and the most impactful findings. And they display the results in a clear manner to clarify their findings. So the last part is the conclusion. They repeat the keywords of the title. You've got the 3 anti-VEGFs. And they have a fair analysis of the results. They do not exaggerate. And of all this, the last statement is very impactful. Yet it's straight to the point. It only contains 14 words and is still being used very commonly even to this day. What does it say? It says, at worst levels of initial visual acuity, aflibercept was more effective at improving vision. Just in 14 words. I have no financial disclosures on this, it's just an example. So that's an example of how effective use of words. Minimal words, maximal information. So now that we have covered what a typical, conventional, somewhat boring written abstracts look like, there's also another type of abstract, which is something quite way more interesting, and those are called graphical abstracts. So what is a graphical abstract? A picture is worth 1,000 words. We all know that. So a graphical abstract uses pictures. It's a single picture. It's an infographic. It has all the information that you require to summarize the main findings in a single picture. So it can be a concluding figure that is taken from the original article, or the authors can actually design an infographic that is specifically meant for an abstract, and that captures the entire content of the article at a single glance. So in other words, the graphical abstract is designed to capture the attention of a wider readership. So this is 4 examples of graphical abstract. So here the first top left, where you see a synapse. So this explains in detail with the cellular mechanism of how an aromatic oil can have analgesic properties. That's summarizing it and simplifying it, but basically that's what they've proven in a single picture. The second picture on top right shows a nanopolymer which affects the lymphatic and not really the blood, just by showing less than 6 nanometers and more than 9 nanometers. So that's the gist of the entire research. Bottom left, so this shows a feedback mechanism of a chemical release from astrocytes, a feedback loop that it releases and it affects the microglia and causes astrocyte to rest, and it also can activate microglia at distant areas. So in a nutshell, you kind of know what it's all about. The last one, so this one shows how a substance called ABT737 modulates the apoptosis. So this basically, you know, it's a cell death, and how it leads to, by putting ABT737, so one is an X for no cascade, basically it's just a cell death pathway, and how by putting this substance, you get a cascade in apoptosis. So the entire science of it is more complicated than it seems, but the magic of abstract is how do you present the entire wealth of information in the smallest possible method, be it in words, the shortest words, or the most concise and most meaningful image. So that's actually an art. It's not easy, but you can see the examples. So it gets better with time. Lastly, you have to peer review your abstract before you send or submit for an actual peer review. So what does it mean? So you read and read and read your edit your abstract yourself, and you ask others for help. And then you leave it for a couple of days, not reading it, and then you come back again with fresh eyes. You'll see some things that you want to change. You pass to your trusted colleagues for proofreading. Alternatively, you can send to professional services. The idea of this is because your abstract essentially holds the entire value of your product, of your entire research, you have to give your very best to make sure that it has the best of your meaning given in the shortest words. So don't be afraid of criticisms, just be objective and positive. So now the last part is, since you're finally writing your abstract, which means that you already have the rest of your scientific article sections written up, the other important thing that you need to know is search engines and improving visibility of your work. So this is especially of relevance in publication. So we write and we submit because we want to show and announce our results to the world. So we want people to see and people to be aware of what we found. So why is it important? So Google and Google Scholar are the principal ways of you and I finding articles, yours and mine, and others online. So by taking simple steps, which is actually quite simple, you can optimize your search and your article for search engines to look up, so to be discovered and read and used and cited, so that it increases the visibility of your article. So you have Google Scholar and Google looking at and skimming at every word that you use in your abstract when you submit it online. So they use certain key factors and certain words, and they have this secret complex mathematical algorithms, and they keep changing every month. And this information was from Sage Publications, so that the search results were as accurate as possible. So when you Google something, say for instance, we're going to depression, say for instance, you Google depression. So the first 10 and the first 20 results, how do you make your article, if you have an article about depression, how do you make your article make the cut in the first 10 or the first 20? Because it's always the first page that people actually click. By the time you reach the 5th page, people don't really browse through the 5th page. So these are some of the factors that they use, that this is used in your algorithms. Some include spelling, some include keywords especially. So here we go into keywords because that's how you can help. So that's the answer to this question. What can I do to help my abstract being more searchable? First, repeat the key phrases in the abstract while you write, but make it look natural. So every search engines will will skim through all the words that you use in your abstract, word by word. And then, so in other words, your abstract feeds information to that, to the search engine to find your article and to rank it on your search results page. So one way is to repeat the key descriptive phrases. So try to imagine phrases a researcher might use for your paper, if it would be interesting. So the keywords that you use are carefully selected, because if you were the reader finding your paper, what would you be typing to find your paper? So you use those logic. The Googles can detect abuse. So if you use too many times, they will basically not, they will detect it and omit it. So don't overplay it, just focus on 3 to 4 keywords. I'll give an example of this. Get your title right. You can change titles, as I showed just now. Your title can be the last thing that you write, because you need to entice the readers into a eye-catching title or a attention grabbing title. So ensure the main key phrases for your topic is in your article title. Make sure your title is descriptive, unambiguous, which is very clear, accurate, and it reads well. Remember, people search on key phrases, not just single words. Example, women's health, not just health, women's health. So health can be anything, it can also be animal health. So choose your keywords carefully. This is repetitive. You can include your main 3 or 4 key phrases and add in at least 3 or 4 additional keywords. So when more than one phrase is often to describe the same thing and various. So this is like anti-VEGF, including Avastin, including ranibizumab or aflibercept, etc. So in summary for that, what key phrases every time you want to choose a key phrase, or when you decide what keyword that you want to give for submission, you ask yourself, what would you type if you want to search your article? So you write for your audience, but you also write as how you want your search engines to find your article. Write a clear title, write an abstract that choose keywords, repeating 3 or 4 key phrases, and keep it natural. I'll show this again. The better you write your abstract, the better chance of you giving your article to appear high up in the search results ranking. So I'm going to give you an example about how this paper, which is one of the highest searchable paper in depression, has a clear descriptive title. It has key terms, phrases. It repeats some key phrases, but in a natural way, and it uses relevant words. So this is a paper by Alex Coppen and his colleague. It's about treatment of depression and considering folic acid and vitamin B12. So that's the first. It gives you a clear descriptive title and you already know what it's all about. And these were the keywords I used. Cobalamin, depression, and folic acid was the main keywords, which is in the title. And then diet, folate, homocysteine, and this is a bit more specific, but it's repeated everywhere else in the title. So the word depression alone has been repeated in this paper because that's the disease. It also has, which I had not underlined, the things like you've got folic acid and folate and cobalamin. So there's some repeat, but it doesn't look like he intentionally repeated so many times just to emphasize the word depression, because there's obviously in his case there's no synonym for depression. But this is an example of how the search engine would be able to capture the abstract, the gist of the abstract, into a searchable abstract. So to summarize, abstract is the most important part of your article. It determines the value of your entire work. It is written last, but it is read first. And you have to read and adhere to author guidelines, give your very best, and spend time, invest time in writing the best abstract you possibly can to make your abstract searchable. So finally, the last slide, tips for good abstract: follow the author's guidelines, write it last, choose good words, clear and committal words. Sentence design must be minimal words, maximal information, concise, to the point, factual, active voice. Use keywords, try to repeat it in your title and abstracts, not too unnatural way. Highlight the key findings. Has to have a clear conclusion. Avoid exaggerating your facts and your results. Invest time and effort in editing it carefully. And peer review. And good luck.
Thank you, Prof. Maya, Dr. Tengku Ain, for the interesting talk. We noted that there are 2 hand raised here, but due to time constraint, we will proceed to next talk first. Then
Okay.
the other those who have question, you can you can actually type in the question box under the Q&A there. Then we will read out the question at the end of the second presentation. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, thanks, Kajun. We will now proceed to the second talk by Professor Dr. Mae-Lynn. She is our own senior consultant ophthalmologist in Vitro Retina. She was the past founding chairperson of our research interest group in UKM. She graduated in 2004 for her master's in ophthalmology in UKM and proceeded to do a clinical fellowship in vitro retina surgery in Tan Tock Seng Hospital, Singapore. She was the head of the department in ophthalmology department UKM from 2010 to 2013. So without further ado, I would like to now invite Professor Dr. Mae-Lynn.
Thank you, Prof. Norshamsiah. Can everybody hear me clearly? Thank you. I see some thumbs up there. Okay, I shall try and share my slides. Can you see now my slide entitled Polls for Presenting Research, Case Reports?
Yes. Let's see.
Okay, and now I'm on the screen share. Yeah. So once again, I thank the organizing committee, Prof. Sham and also Prof. Tengku for being so wonderful to come and speak to us and really set the stage for this Pulse for Presenting Research webinar series. Yeah. So I've taken on the task of sharing with you some tips for writing case reports. And Prof. Ain has already given us some really useful tips on abstract writing. And the abstract is also part of the case report. So I'll only briefly touch on it. In my disclaimer, I have no direct financial interest to declare for any of the material presented here. Yeah. So the outline of the talk will be as follows. We will introduce the concept of case report and then go through the writing of a good case report, have a quick look at the figure, finding the right journal, and some English editing and plagiarism checks, which is an important aspect of our case report writing or any writing for that matter. And then we go through a checklist and then we do a little conclusion. So you may be surprised to know that the first case report, indeed the first case series was written almost 2,000 years ago, yeah, in Egypt. And this is the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus. So case reports have actually been around for a long time. And the meaning of a case report is that it's a detailed report of the diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up of an individual patient, or in the case of a series of a number of patients linked by something similar. And it's a description that is important for scientific and clinical observations that we may miss or fail to detect in clinical trials. So, but it's good to and important to remember that the scientific evidence wise in the hierarchy, well, case reports seem to be at the bottom. Okay, of course, it is still better than other evidences used in the public in terms as scientific evidence, but clearly case reports come at the bottom. Okay. However, the value of the case report has to be taken from the perspective that the case report is usually the source of new knowledge and the result of keen observation. And so it is very valuable for instruction and education. On the other side, on the downside, however, the journals that publish case reports tend to recognize that they do not really help that particular journal to achieve a high impact factor. So the 5 main indications for writing a case report will be to recognize and describe a new disease. A really good example of this will be the recent coronavirus, in which many of the initial research that we saw would be in the form of a case report. And case reports are also useful when rare manifestations of a known disease are recognized, or when we elucidate mechanisms of disease. And we also would publish a case report for adverse or beneficial drug treatment side effects, or indeed of any treatment. And case reports are also a good start to medical writing and reporting, and they also are a form of medical education and audit. What are the characteristics of a good case report? I think it would be something that is short and focused, very enjoyable to read with a good flow of thoughts and ideas, appropriately referenced, and helps to bridge what we know, but with what we are excited to find out or test. And it may contain useful and practical information, and therefore should have a form of take-home message or practical conclusion. And the main components of the case report include the abstract or introduction, the abstract, the title. They have an introduction or background, and then they describe the case, and then you have the discussion. So that's the 5 components. So in the starting a good case report, we have to kind of be like a super sleuth. We need to know what is in the literature and to be mindful when something unique appears in your clinic or among the cases that you are managing. It's also useful to be aware of the current research environment. For example, there's a lot of interest in COVID-19. We should take pictures regularly if this is available. So taking the fundus photograph or the anterior segment photograph, or indeed the external examination photograph is useful. Also the OCT images where needed or where necessary to support your diagnosis. Angiograms again for this purpose as well, or some other more unique tests or investigations, including things like fundus autofluorescence, corneal topography, etc. So all these actually are very useful to support the report subsequently and should be thought of when the patient is with you. And this should also be backed up, given that at times we may lose some of our databases for whatever reason. And a consent form is actually useful and handy to keep in the clinic, because if the patient is in front of you, we ought to take this consent from them before we use any of their images. And so we need to read good reports for all the ideas that we need to get writing, and read thoroughly on the topic of a case that you have discovered to be interesting. And when you're coming to the writing, you may want to consider thinking of the journal, reading the instructions for authors and the submission guidelines very, very carefully before you start the writing, because different journals have different requirements. Let's start again with the components of the case report. So we start off with the title now, having gone through how we should write an abstract. Prior to this in the previous talk, I will just focus a little bit on the other components of the case report for the given time. So the title should be short and catchy, because it's the first thing that the reader reads. And it should focus on the particular issue that you are conveying in the report. Try to avoid using redundant and terms such as case report, a review of the literature, or things that are a little bit cliche like first case or unique report. Okay, so examples include from some of my own writings on case report. I've written a title like this on a rare disease, which is a Noonan syndrome. So I focused on the surgical management of fragmentogenous RD in this particular case. So you could write it like that, a bit long, perhaps it could have been summarized some more. Another title that I used was for a case in which there was unexpected outcome. I entitled my case report Brilliant Crystallization. Terms like this are of course useful to attract the attention of the viewer and the reader. Brilliant crystallization in the anterior chamber following ranibizumab. So that's one more. And you can write a title like this where it is reflected the front to back ocular injury from a vaping related explosion. So these are some titles that you could use, not necessarily just to use the very much used titles like case report or first case report. And when we move on to the introduction or background, this is where in general, it might be useful to define the condition, to explain the rarity perhaps of the case that you're presenting, You may wish to overview the relevant presentation or treatment of this condition in order to highlight why you are sharing the case. In other words, the objective of sharing this case report. You may also wish to give a focused, comprehensive literature review, one that is not very exhaustive. So I've written some introductions in my case reports, and in this background, for example, the picture on the left, the figure on the left, it shows that I have written, I hope to share with my colleagues the anterior segment photographs documenting unusual brilliant crystals. So this is the reason why we do the report. Yeah, so the background has that in essence. And if you're writing to the editor on a case, you should start off by telling them that what you have read recently in their report in that particular journal, and why you would like to contribute that particular case to them again. So these are some ways the introduction can be done. And there may be a number of details more that you wish to put in depending on the requirement of the journal. The most important part at the beginning will be to describe the case. So the case description tips will include the breakdown of what is expected to be in the case history. So you would have the history of the case, and I think from your clerking, training, you know that when you take a clinical clerking of a case, you would be looking into the demographical information. So you would take down the age, the gender, the ethnicity of the case, subject, what was the presenting illness or ocular complaint, what was relevant in the past ocular, medical, or surgical history. In this case, what I notice is that we sometimes forget to put in the negatives. I think negatives are also important because they highlight how your patient presented and what would have been expected in certain other cases, but was not particularly found in your patient. It could even be relevant to the subsequent diagnosis and management. Also, where relevant, the family history, medications, and occupational history can be put in this part of the case report. In terms of examination findings, we describe the affected eye first, but we also not forget to include the fellow eye findings, especially if there was something relevant, and also if it was normal. And again, the relevant negatives on examination. So for instance, in this case, on the Noonan syndrome again, so we talk about the background, how the patient presented, and a little bit about the birth history in this case, because it is a child. And on examination, not only the ocular findings, but also the overall features of the patient where relevant, and to give clearly the examination findings that were important in relation to that particular patient. And so after we have given the case description, then we give impressions, our impression or provisional and differential diagnosis, and also mention the investigation and treatment that was performed, and finally the outcome and follow-up, including the duration of follow-up before this part of the case report is completed. An important tip is to describe in detail what was done. So in other words, if a surgical procedure was performed, then it is useful to describe in detail the surgery, including the names of all the instruments that were used, because this will allow someone who is reading your report to consider reproducing it based on what you have described. Also avoid making any conclusions or inferences or summaries in this particular section, because that is left for the discussion. In the case of the discussion, which follows subsequent to the case history report, this is actually an extremely important section, which aims to summarize and contrast the case, hence highlighting the uniqueness of the case. In this segment, which many trainees find hard to write, it is important to first and foremost not be intimidated by the discussion, but to compare what you know about this condition by reviewing the findings from other reports and other studies. And then compare that to your current case, highlighting what was similar and what was different. And after you've gone through the literature in this manner, then theorize according to basic principles, knowledge, or other readings, why your result was unique, different, or similar. and then honestly explain the limitations of the case, and then end off with practical tips and suggestions to take home. So for instance, from BMJ case report, the structure is such that at the end of the discussion, again, reflecting some of the points I've made here, we look at the learning points and perhaps give between 3 to 5 learning points, even if it is not expressly required by the particular journal. But of course, do follow the instructions. And I think one wonderful thing about case reports is that they really utilize figures. So in the figure for a case report, it's very important to maintain a centered figure. In other words, the area of importance or highlight should be in the center of the photograph, which should be clear, labeled correctly. And it's very, very important to maintain patient confidentiality and remove all the patient identifiers. Also bear in mind that the resolution of the image, while it may appear sufficient to you, may not be sufficient to the journal. Here in these two pictures, they look very similar in terms of the resolution, and partly it's because of our internet connections. I may not be able to show you the subtle differences between these two, but suffice to say that they actually have very different sizes, and they are in different formats, and journals may require you to have high resolution for your clinical images. So it is important also when you take your photographs in the clinic to ensure that the setting is at the highest resolution that the particular photo device can acquire. Yeah? So this is important to bear in mind as well. Finding the right journal is another challenge for case report writers. So we can actually use services which are for a fee. And of course, there are some free services as well, but then you have to make the efforts on your own, such as the search engines, which are very nicely described as well by Prof. Tengku. Just a note of caution about predatory journals. The definition of predatory journals was in this article by Goodness. And in other words, it highlights that there are some entities out there that prioritize their self-interest at the expense of good scholarship. They may portray false or misleading information, and they do not have good editorial and publication practices, and they're not transparent in how they evaluate the peer review, and they may use aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices, in other words, charging exorbitant fees. So be aware of these journals. Be aware of also of unethical publication practices, because there are some third parties that for a fee try to get their names into the writing. But there is no list to actually tell us clearly what is predatory and what is not. And sometimes there is actually, as in this Venn diagram, an overlap. But we do have some online methods of looking up these predatory journals, and we can actually type that in. Using reliable databases is actually better way of ensuring we do not fall prey to a predatory journal. So just a quick half-minute video here. I'm mindful of the time. So you can use the JCR Insights. It is a journal citation report website where you can actually find the journal, its impact factor. You can look for rank of the journals in this particular website. The latest rank can be found. You can also search by category. So if you want an ophthalmology journal, you can key that in. You can look up the rank of the journal, and just bearing in mind that Q1 is defined as the top 25, followed by Q4, yeah, at the end, which is the lower 25%. So finding the right journal is an important thing. And you can use this particular website. The other thing to bear in mind that even though we are from the ophthalmology fraternity, it is not necessary to only send to an ophthalmology journal. Consider what the reader would like to, your reader or your target audience. It could be medical, it could be the psychiatrists, it could be, the infectious disease specialists, and look at how novel your case is. Do not go too high if it is something that has been published many, many times before. In a quick summary, you should actually run your case report through English editing and plagiarism, and there are a number of ways of doing this. Even your Microsoft Office, the Microsoft Word, actually highlights for you that there are some errors as shown here. You can also use some other apps or programs like Grammarly and Turnitin to ensure that you have not plagiarized or duplicated anybody else's work. Yeah. So in other words, the checklist for the case report will be ensuring that the patient is well consented. The journals may require this, or you may have in your institution a consent form, which is useful to have handy. And remember to remove all your patient identifiers, do your English editing, check for plagiarism, ensure that your article is correctly formatted to the journal requirements, and also look into the references formatting to ensure that it is well accepted. In conclusion, have fun writing your case report, look out for meaningful, interesting cases in your practice, and take the effort to share your observations with the rest of the world. And the case report is one nice way to start out on your scientific writing journey. So all knowledge is connected to all other knowledge. The fun is in making the connections. And if you have the knowledge, do let others light your candle, their candles in it as well. So here are some of my references and also my sources. And if you like a nice, some more reading on this, I found this nice article, Tips for Writing a Case Report for the Novice Author, which you can actually spend some time reading through in more detail on case reports. Here are my acknowledgements, and I want to thank everybody for their hard work in coming together and making this webinar a success for its first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. May, for the useful tips in writing case report. I would like to ask all the participants, is there any question to the two speakers, to Prof. Maya, Dr. Tengku Ain, and also Prof. Dr. Mae-Lynn, regarding the abstract and also the how to write the abstract and also the case report?
Perhaps I can ask the first question to Prof. Ain. It was interesting to see that there is such a thing as figural abstracts.
Oh yes, graphical.
Because to be honest, graphical abstract, yeah. Because to be honest, I've never seen abstracts in journals which are graphical.
Yeah.
But can you just, where do you find this kind of journals?
So it's usually basic. So the sources I got was from Elsevier. So if you type Elsevier graphical abstracts, you will see the same that's where I took the pictures from. So usually I think they use it as for scientific research, those that is lab-based research, those that is exploring pathways, mechanisms, and even AI. There was a thing about AI, how they could extract noise from the images that you see on a muscle. So I think mainly not so much clinical, because unless you talk about, say for instance, a new anti-VEGF drug, mechanism of action, perhaps then you can put that into a picture in infographic. But apart from that, I would imagine for clinical, for clinical, it might be a bit difficult.
Yeah, like I said, I've never seen one. Probably for molecular stuffs, it's easier to portray in a graphical.
Yeah.
A nice way to summarize, that large amount of information, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. So that's why I said it was a good topic that you chose, because I get educated doing this
Yeah,
talk.
Same here. Yeah.
It was really
nice
interesting.
journey. Love your talk, Anne.
Thank you.
So for the participants, to be clear, the abstract, I think, is the most important part of your manuscript or your poster or your oral presentation, because in any sort of publication, the abstract is a must. You cannot publish anything without an abstract. And therefore, if you know, like what Prof. Ain has taught us how to make good abstracts, then your paper might go quite far. Any other questions from the participants? You can type in your Q&A.
Were there some that put their hands up? I think there were some that put their hands up, right? Have we answered their questions?
This one, Mirella Afiruddin.
We can unmute her.
Actually, I already unmute Mirella. So if you have any question, you can ask now.
Hi, Mirella. I see it's still muted on her screen. I do not know if...
Actually, we can only ask to unmute. It's depending on her to unmute herself.
Mirella, you still need to unmute.
Mirella, are you there? I guess she accidentally clicked the hand raising button. Any other question from other participants?
I think we had another one, right? What happened to the other person who had their hand up earlier on in the talk? So sorry, we had to go on due to
I
constraints.
think some technical issue just now.
Wow, it's so clear, I think.
I don't know. Hopefully they're still around.
I think if there's no further question, we can proceed to Dr. Anya. Oh, before I go, maybe I would like to thank the delegates from Indonesia. We have some Indonesian colleagues here with us. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this webinar has been beneficial to all of you in helping you to publish or present during conferences. Okay, now I will hand over to Dr. Anya to continue the show.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers and also Dr. Sham moderating the session. I would also like to take this opportunity to promote our next session, which will be in about 1 month's time, which is on the 24th of July at the same time on a Friday at 3 p.m. Please book it on your calendar. And you can also start registering for the registration and also for the webinar link. And also, you will also receive at the end of this session a Google form for the feedback for this session. So it's really important that you give us the feedback that is really beneficial on how we can improve for this webinar session, so the subsequent ones will be better. All right. So without further ado, that is it. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting.
All right. Thank you.